The auction block wasn't supposed to be for people anymore, but desperation made monsters of decent men, and Delilah Sutherland stood there anyway, her hands trembling as the crowd of dusty ranch owners and businessmen gathered in the scorching July heat of San Pedro, California in 1878. Her father had gambled away everything they owned to a man named Cyrus Blackwell, and when he couldn't pay, Blackwell had offered this twisted solution: sell his daughter into indentured servitude to settle the $5,000 debt. The auctioneer, a weasel-faced man with tobacco-stained teeth, rattled off her qualities like she was livestock. 20 years old, healthy, could read and write, knew her way around a kitchen and a garden. Delilah kept her eyes fixed on the horizon where the Pacific Ocean met the sky, trying to pretend she was anywhere else. The San Pedro harbor bustled with activity in the distance, ships coming and going with their precious cargo, free to sail wherever the wind took them. She wished she could disappear onto one of those vessels. "Do I hear $1,000? The auctioneer called out. A portly man in an expensive suit raised his hand. Delilah recognized him as the owner of the general store, a widower with wandering eyes who'd made her uncomfortable more than once. 1,500. Another voice called. This one belonged to a rancher she didn't know, his face weathered and cruel. She forced herself to breathe. Her father stood off to the side, unable to meet her eyes, his shoulders hunched in shame. She wanted to hate him, but he looked so broken that she couldn't muster anything but a hollow ache in her chest. Her mother had died 3 years ago, and he'd drowned his grief in cards and whiskey. Now they were both paying the price. 2,000. The general store owner again. The bidding continued, climbing higher, and with each increment, Delilah felt a piece of herself crumble away. She scanned the crowd, seeing faces she'd known her whole life, people from their church, neighbors who'd shared meals at their table. None of them met her gaze. Shame burned hot in her throat. Then she saw him. A cowboy stood at the back of the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar beneath his wide-brimmed hat. He wore dusty traveling clothes and had the lean, muscled build of someone who spent his days in the saddle. But it was his face that caught her attention, handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw covered in a few days' worth of stubble, and eyes so intensely blue they seemed to cut through the distance between them. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between anger and determination. She'd never seen him before in her life. 3,000, the rancher shouted. The cowboy pushed through the crowd, moving with purpose. People stepped aside, perhaps sensing the barely controlled fury radiating from him. He stopped at the front, his jaw clenched tight. 5,000, he said, his voice deep and steady, carrying easily across the gathering. I'll pay the full debt right now and end this damned circus. The crowd went silent. The auctioneer's eyes widened with greedy delight. Well now, that's a generous offer, Mr. Matthew Young, the cowboy said, not taking his eyes off Delilah. Something in his gaze made her breath catch. It wasn't the look of a man buying property. It was something else entirely, something that made her pulse quicken for reasons she didn't understand. Sold, the auctioneer crowed, slamming his gavel down before anyone could counter. The young lady goes to Mr. Young for $5,000. Matthew climbed onto the platform, and Delilah instinctively took a step back. He held up a hand, palm out, a gesture meant to calm. Up close, he was even more striking and younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 25 or 26. There were scars on his knuckles and a faded mark along his jawline, evidence of a life lived hard. I'm not going to hurt you, he said quietly, so only she could hear. His voice held a gentleness that contradicted the roughness of his appearance. I promise you that. She didn't know whether to believe him, but what choice did she have? The auctioneer produced papers, already prepared with her name and the terms of servitude. 7 years of labor to work off the debt, with room and board provided. She would be bound to Matthew Young in every way except marriage, with no freedom to leave or make her own choices. Her hands shook as she watched the auctioneer hand the papers to Matthew. Matthew took them, his expression darkening as he read through the terms. His jaw worked, a muscle ticking in his cheek. Then, without warning, he tore the papers clean in half. The crowd gasped. Delilah stared at him in shock. "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" Cyrus Blackwell pushed forward, his face red with rage. He was a heavy man with cruel eyes and a reputation for ruthlessness. "Those are legal documents." Matthew tore the papers again and again until they were nothing but scraps fluttering to the wooden platform. "I don't believe in owning people," he said, his voice carrying a hard edge now. "Not anymore, not ever." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. "Here's your 5,000, Blackwell. The debt is paid. The girl is free." Blackwell snatched the envelope, counting the bills with quick, greedy fingers. "Fine by me, but she's still yours, bought and paid for. What you do with her is your business." "No." Matthew turned to Delilah, and suddenly he was dropping to one knee on the dusty platform, right there in front of everyone. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Miss Sutherland, I know you don't know me from Adam. I know this is about the strangest situation you've ever been in, but I'm asking you, as a free woman with the right to choose, if you'd consider becoming my wife." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Delilah couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Marriage, to a complete stranger. I don't understand." His blue eyes held hers, earnest and unwavering. "I came to San Pedro looking for a wife. Been working a ranch up in the valley for the past 4 years, saved up enough to build a good house, start a real life. I heard about what was happening here today, and it made me sick. No woman should be sold like property. So I figured I could solve 2 problems at once, save you from this nightmare and find myself a partner." He paused, his expression softening. "I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not even asking you to stay forever if you find you can't stand the sight of me. But I'm offering you a choice, which is more than you had 5 minutes ago. Marry me, come to the ranch, and if after a year you want to leave, I'll give you enough money to start over wherever you want. You'll be free, I swear it." Tears burned in Delilah's eyes. She looked at her father, who was openly weeping now. She looked at the crowd, at Blackwell's satisfied sneer, at the other men who'd bid on her like she was a horse. Then she looked back at Matthew Young, this stranger who'd just spent a fortune to give her back her freedom. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" Something painful flickered across his face. "Because somebody should have done it for my sister, and nobody did." The weight of those words settled over her. She didn't know his story, didn't know anything about him except that he'd just saved her life. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was more than enough. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger now. "I'll marry you." The crowd erupted in murmurs and whispers, but Matthew just smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his whole face, and stood, offering her his hand. She took it, his palm warm and calloused against hers, and let him help her down from the platform. Blackwell pocketed his money and disappeared into the crowd. Her father approached, reaching for her, but Matthew stepped smoothly between them. "I think you've done enough," Matthew said, his voice quiet but firm. "If the lady wants to speak with you, that's her choice. But you don't get to touch her, not after what you just put her through." Delilah's father flinched as if he'd been struck. He looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. "Delilah, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, baby girl. I never meant for things to get this bad." The anger she'd been suppressing roared to life. "You sold me," she said, her voice shaking. You looked me in the eye this morning and told me there was no other way, and then you let them put me on that platform like I was nothing, like Mama's daughter meant nothing to you. I was desperate, so was I. The tears spilled over now. Every day since Mama died, I've been desperate. I've been alone and scared and trying to hold everything together while you drank yourself into oblivion. And when things got bad enough, you decided the solution was to sell your only child. Her father's face crumpled. I know, and I'll regret it until the day I die. But please, you have to understand, I don't have to do anything anymore. She felt Matthew's solid presence beside her, anchoring her. Goodbye, Papa. She turned away and Matthew moved with her, his hand light on her lower back, guiding her through the crowd. People parted for them, and she kept her head high even though tears streamed down her face. She didn't look back. Matthew led her to a sturdy-looking horse tied up outside the general store. The animal was a beautiful bay with intelligent eyes. "This is Copper," he said, stroking the horse's neck. "He's got a good temperament. I've got another horse and a wagon back at the livery where I'm staying. We can gather your things if you have any, then head to the church if you're still willing." The practicality of his words helped ground her. "I have a few dresses and books at the house. But I don't want to go back there. Everything I truly care about is already gone." She thought of her mother's wedding ring sold months ago to pay for food, her grandmother's quilt traded for whiskey money. All the pieces of her old life scattered and lost. Matthew nodded. "Then we'll get you new things. The general store here has ladies' goods, doesn't it? You've already spent so much money. And I'll spend a bit more to make sure you have what you need." His tone left no room for argument. A wife needs dresses and personal items. It's not charity, it's common sense. The word wife sent a strange flutter through her chest. She was about to marry this man, this stranger with kind eyes and a tragic past he'd only hinted at. They went into the general store, and Matthew waited patiently while she selected 2 new dresses, a nightgown, undergarments, a hairbrush, and a few other necessities. The store owner, the same man who'd bid on her, rang up the purchases with barely concealed disappointment. Matthew paid without comment, then carried the parcels outside. "The church is just up the street," Delilah said. "Father Michael will marry us. He's known me since I was a baby." She wondered what the priest would say about this hasty marriage, but surely he'd see it was better than the alternative. They walked side by side through San Pedro's dusty streets, past the harbor where ships rocked gently at anchor, past the cantinas and boarding houses that served the rough crowd of sailors and dock workers. It was a town balanced between respectability and wildness, Spanish and American influences mixing in the architecture and the faces they passed. Delilah had lived here her entire life, but now it felt foreign, as if she were seeing it through different eyes. Father Michael was in the garden behind the church, tending his vegetables. He looked up as they approached, his weathered face registering surprise. "Delilah, my child, I heard about what happened today. I'm glad to see you looking well. Father, this is Matthew Young. He saved me from being sold, and now we'd like to get married if you'll perform the ceremony." The priest's bushy eyebrows rose. He looked between them, taking in Matthew's travel-worn clothes and Delilah's tear-stained face. "This is quite sudden." "Yes, sir, it is," Matthew said respectfully. "But my intentions are honorable. I'm offering Miss Sutherland my name and my protection. She'll want for nothing, and she'll be treated with the respect she deserves." Father Michael studied Matthew for a long moment. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him, because he nodded slowly. "Very well. Let me get my book. We'll need 2 witnesses. I'll fetch Mrs. Rodriguez from next door and her son. They're good people." 20 minutes later, Delilah stood in the small chapel with Matthew beside her, sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows and painting them both in shades of blue and gold. Mrs. Rodriguez, a kind-faced woman who'd brought soup when Delilah's mother was dying, stood witness with her teenage son. Father Michael opened his prayer book, and the ceremony began. Delilah's mind drifted as the priest spoke the familiar words. This morning, she'd woken up in her own bed, terrified of what the day would bring. Now she was getting married to a man whose last name she'd learned only an hour ago. It felt surreal, like something happening to someone else. Do you, Matthew Young, take Delilah Sutherland to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do. Matthew's voice was strong and sure. And do you, Delilah Sutherland, take Matthew Young to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? This was her last chance to say no, to choose uncertainty over this leap into the unknown. But when she looked at Matthew, she saw steadiness in his eyes, a promise that he meant every word he'd said. And what was the alternative? Return to her father's house. Try to make it on her own in a world that had just demonstrated exactly how little value it placed on a woman alone. I do, she said. Father Michael smiled. Then, by the power vested in me by the Church and the state of California, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Matthew, you may kiss your bride. Matthew turned to her, and she saw hesitation in his eyes. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and pressed a chaste kiss to her lips. It was brief and gentle, over almost before it began, but it sent warmth spreading through her chest nonetheless. They signed the marriage certificate, Mrs. Rodriguez and her son adding their names as witnesses. Just like that, Delilah Sutherland became Delilah Young. The name felt strange in her mind, foreign and new, belonging to a life she couldn't yet imagine. Outside the church, Matthew helped her onto Copper's back, then swung up behind her. She stiffened at the sudden proximity, feeling the solid warmth of his chest against her back, his arms coming around to hold the reins. We'll ride to the livery and get my wagon, he said, his breath stirring her hair. Then we'll head north to the ranch. It's about a 3-hour ride. We'll get there before dark. She nodded, not trusting her voice. As they rode through town, she saw people staring, whispering behind their hands. No doubt the story of her auction and sudden marriage would be the talk of San Pedro for months. She was glad to be leaving. At the livery stable, Matthew saddled his other horse, a sturdy roan gelding named Scout, and hitched both horses to a covered wagon. He helped Delilah onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. With a click of his tongue and a light snap of the leather, they were moving, leaving San Pedro behind. They traveled in silence for the first hour, following the coast road north before turning inland toward the valley. The landscape changed from sandy scrubland to rolling hills dotted with oak trees. The afternoon heat was intense, and Delilah was grateful for the bonnet Mrs. Rodriguez had insisted she take. Finally, Matthew spoke. I suppose we should get to know each other, seeing as we're married now. Despite everything, Delilah felt a small smile tug at her lips. That might be wise. I'm 26 years old, born in Missouri, came west with my family when I was 15. My parents and my sister died of cholera on the trail. I was the only one who survived. His voice was matter of fact, but she heard the old pain beneath it. After that, I worked as a ranch hand wherever I could find work, saved every penny. 4 years ago, I bought into a partnership on a cattle ranch in the San Fernando Valley. My partner, Jack Sullivan, runs most of the day-to-day operations. I handle the horses, breeding and training them for sale. We've built up a good reputation." "I'm sorry about your family," Delilah said softly. "That must have been unbearable. It was a long time ago." But his hands tightened on the reins. "My sister, Clara, she was 17 when she died. Sweet girl, never hurt anybody. Before the cholera took her, she was." He trailed off, jaw working. "There was a man on the wagon train. He had money and influence. He decided Clara should be his, and our parents were too sick to stop him. I tried to fight him, but I was just a kid. He beat me half to death and locked me in one of the wagons. By the time I got free, Clara had. She'd taken her own life rather than let him touch her again." Horror washed over Delilah. "Oh, Matthew." The man claimed it was grief over our parents dying. Everyone believed him. He went on to California and probably lived a fine life. Matthew's voice was rough. "I couldn't save her. But when I heard about what was happening to you today, I thought maybe I could do for you what I couldn't do for Clara. Maybe I could give you a choice." Tears pricked Delilah's eyes again. "You gave me more than a choice. You gave me my life back. You deserved better than what your father did to you. I know." And she did know, even though part of her still ached for the man her father used to be before grief and gambling destroyed him. "My mother died of pneumonia 3 years ago. She was the strong one, the one who held everything together. After she was gone, my father just fell apart. He tried at first to be strong for me, but the grief was too much. He started gambling, trying to win enough money to make things better, but he only made it worse. When Cyrus Blackwell came to collect the debt, Papa didn't know what else to do. He should have figured out anything else," Matthew said firmly. "But that's done now. You're away from it, and you'll never have to worry about being sold or bartered again. I swear that to you." They fell back into silence, but it was more comfortable now. Delilah studied her new husband's profile, the strong nose, the determined set of his jaw, the way his eyes scanned the landscape with the ease of someone used to reading the land. He was handsome, she acknowledged, in a rough, outdoor way that was completely different from the soft-handed town boys she'd known growing up. There was a gentleness to him despite his hard edges, a kindness in the way he'd handled her today. "What about you?" Matthew asked. "Tell me about yourself." "There's not much to tell. I've lived in San Pedro my whole life. My mother taught me to read and write, to sew and cook and manage a household. I love books, though we didn't have many. I used to borrow them from Father Michael." She thought about what else defined her. "I sing, though not very well. I can't abide cruelty to animals. And I'm terrified of deep water, which is silly considering I grew up next to the ocean." "Not silly. Everyone's afraid of something." "What are you afraid of?" he considered for a moment. "Becoming the kind of man who does nothing when someone needs help." The simplicity and honesty of the answer touched her. They rode on, talking in fits and starts, sharing small details about their lives. Matthew told her about the ranch, describing the house he'd built with his own hands, the horses he was training, his partner Jack and Jack's wife Rose, who lived in a house on the other side of the property. Delilah told him about her mother's garden, the books she loved, the time she tried to rescue a baby bird and ended up with a family of sparrows living in her bedroom for a week. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when they crested a hill, and Delilah saw the valley spread out below them. It was beautiful, a patchwork of green and gold, with a river winding through it like a silver ribbon. In the distance, she could see buildings and fence lines. "That's home," Matthew said, and she heard the pride in his voice. "The young ranch." As they descended into the valley, Delilah felt nerves flutter in her stomach. This was really happening. She was going to a new place, to live with a man she'd just met, to start a life she couldn't begin to imagine. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. They passed through a gate marked with a wooden sign bearing the ranch's name. Cattle grazed in distant fields, and she could see horses in a large corral near the barn. The house came into view, a sturdy two-story structure made of wood and stone, with a covered porch and real glass windows. It was bigger than she'd expected and clearly built with care. A woman came out onto the porch as they approached, shading her eyes against the setting sun. She was small and dark-haired, wearing a practical dress and an apron. When she saw the wagon, her face lit up with curiosity. Matthew pulled the horses to a stop and jumped down, then came around to help Delilah. His hands were strong around her waist as he lifted her down, and for a moment they stood close together, his face very near to hers. "Welcome home, Delilah," he said quietly. The words made something warm unfold in her chest. "Matthew," the woman called, hurrying down the porch steps. "We didn't expect you back until tomorrow, and who's this?" "Rose, this is Delilah. She's my wife as of about 2 hours ago." Rose stopped short, her eyes going wide. "You're what?" "It's a long story. Is Jack around?" "In the barn." Rose was staring at Delilah now, her expression a mix of shock and delight. "Your wife? Matthew Young, you went to San Pedro to buy breeding stock and came back with a wife." Despite the strangeness of the day, Delilah found herself smiling at Rose's obvious excitement. "It's nice to meet you." "Oh, honey, the pleasure is all mine. Come on, let's get you inside. You must be exhausted." Rose linked her arm through Delilah's and started toward the house, chattering away. "I can't believe Matthew got married. Jack and I have been trying to find him a wife for 2 years now, but he always said he was too busy. Wait until Jack hears about this, he's going to fall right off his horse." Matthew followed behind with Delilah's parcels, and she could hear him chuckling at Rose's enthusiasm. Inside, the house was even nicer than she'd expected. The main room had a large stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, and bookshelves lined with volumes. Through a doorway, she could see a kitchen with a modern stove and a dining table. Stairs led up to what she assumed were the bedrooms. "Matthew built most of this himself," Rose said proudly. "That man can do just about anything he sets his mind to. Come on, I'll show you the bedroom. You'll want to freshen up before dinner. Oh, we should have a celebration dinner. Let me go get Jack, he won't believe this." Rose disappeared out the back door, and suddenly Delilah was alone with Matthew in his house. Their house, she corrected herself. This was her home now. "Rose is a force of nature," Matthew said apologetically. "She means well. She and Jack have been good friends to me. She seems lovely." Delilah looked around, taking in the details of the room. Everything was well made and functional, but there were personal touches to a quilt on the back of the sofa that looked handmade, books stacked on the side table, a framed photograph of a young family on the mantel. She wondered if it was his family, the ones he'd lost. "Let me show you upstairs." Matthew led the way up the wooden staircase. There were 3 doors on the second floor. He opened the first one. "This is the main bedroom. I sleep," he caught himself. "I've been sleeping here. But there's a guest room too if you'd be more comfortable with your own space. I don't expect. I mean, I know this marriage isn't conventional. You don't have to, Matthew." She placed a hand on his arm, stopping his nervous rambling. It was strange to see this confident man suddenly uncertain. "I appreciate you being considerate of my feelings. Let's take things slowly and see how we manage. For tonight, I think my own room might be best. This has been an overwhelming day." Relief crossed his face. "Of course, the guest room is just here." He opened the door to a smaller but still comfortable room with a bed, a wardrobe, and a window overlooking the valley. "I'll bring your things up." While he did that, Delilah stood at the window, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. She was married. She had a new home, a new name, a new life. It was almost too much to process. A knock on the doorframe made her turn. Matthew stood there with her parcels. "I'll let you get settled. Come down when you're ready. No rush." After he left, Delilah unpacked her few belongings, hanging her new dresses in the wardrobe and placing her nightgown on the bed. She washed her face in the basin on the dresser, smoothing back her dark hair and retying her bun. In the small mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her brown eyes looked different, somehow still scared, but maybe with a glimmer of hope now too. Voices drifted up from downstairs. Delilah took a deep breath and descended to find Matthew talking with a tall, rangy man with sun-bleached hair and laugh lines around his eyes. This had to be Jack. "So you actually went and married her," Jack was saying, his tone amazed. "Matthew, you are full of surprises." "The situation called for drastic action," Matthew replied. Jack noticed Delilah and immediately swept off his hat. "Madam, it's an honor to meet you. I'm Jack Sullivan, Matthew's partner and neighbor. Rose is over the moon about you being here. She's been complaining about being the only woman on this ranch for years." "I'm happy to meet you two," Delilah said. Rose bustled in from the kitchen, carrying a bottle of wine. "We're going to celebrate properly. Delilah, you sit right down here and relax. Dinner will be ready in an hour. Jack, go tell the ranch hands they can have the evening off. Matthew's gotten himself hitched and we're having a party." The evening took on a festive air. Rose produced a meal of roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from her garden. Jack opened the wine and poured generous glasses. They ate at the dining table, and Delilah found herself relaxing as the conversation flowed. Jack and Rose were easy company, joking and laughing, telling stories about the ranch and about Matthew's exploits. "He saved 3 horses from a burning barn last year," Jack said. "Ran in there without thinking twice, even though the whole thing was coming down around his ears. Got them all out without a scratch on any of them." "You would have done the same," Matthew said, looking embarrassed. "Maybe, but I wasn't there." "You were." Jack raised his glass. "To Matthew, who makes a habit of rescuing those in need. And to Delilah, who was smart enough to say yes to this stubborn fool. May you have many happy years together." They all drank, and Delilah felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the wine. These people had welcomed her without question, accepting her into their lives because Matthew had brought her here. It was more kindness than she'd experienced from her own community in San Pedro. As the evening wore on and the candles burned low, Rose and Jack finally took their leave, with Rose extracting a promise from Delilah to come visit her tomorrow. Then it was just Matthew and Delilah in the quiet house, the weight of their new marriage settling over them. "I should help clean up," Delilah said, gathering plates. "Leave it," Matthew said. "It can wait until morning. You've had a hell of a day." She couldn't argue with that. Exhaustion was creeping over her now that the adrenaline had worn off. "Thank you," she said, "for everything you did today. For giving me a choice, for bringing me here." Matthew moved closer, his blue eyes intense in the candlelight. "I know you didn't choose this life, not really, but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you're happy here. You have my word on that. I believe you." And she did, she realized. This man was honorable in a way that was increasingly rare. "Good night, Matthew." "Good night, Delilah." She climbed the stairs to her room and changed into her new nightgown, then slipped between the unfamiliar sheets. Through the wall, she could hear Matthew moving around in the next room, the creak of floorboards, the sound of boots being removed. Her husband. The word still felt strange. Sleep was a long time coming, but when it finally did, it was deep and dreamless, the first peaceful rest she'd had in weeks. The next few days established a rhythm. Matthew rose before dawn to work with the horses, and Delilah discovered she was expected to do whatever she pleased. Rose came over that first morning and took her on a tour of the ranch, introducing her to the handful of ranch hands who worked there, showing her the vegetable garden and the chicken coop, the barn and the tack room and the spring house where they kept things cool. "Matthew's been cooking for himself for years," Rose explained, "but he's not exactly a gourmet. If you know how to cook, I'm sure he'd appreciate it, but don't feel like you have to. This isn't a traditional situation after all." But Delilah wanted to contribute something. She'd spent her whole life managing a household, and it gave her purpose. So she took over the cooking, preparing meals that made Matthew's eyes light up when he came in for dinner. She cleaned the house, not because it was expected, but because she needed something to occupy her hands and mind. She started a new garden, planting herbs and flowers alongside the vegetables. In the evenings after dinner, she and Matthew would sit on the porch and talk. These conversations became the foundation of something deeper than circumstance. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, his plans to expand the breeding program, his love for working with horses. She told him about the books she'd read, her memories of her mother, her hopes for a life that was more than just survival. One evening, about a week after they'd married, Matthew came in from the barn looking troubled. "One of the mares is having trouble foaling," he said. "I might be out there most of the night." "Can I help?" Delilah asked. He looked surprised. "It's not pleasant work." "I'm not afraid of hard work." So she followed him to the barn, where a beautiful chestnut mare was in labor, clearly struggling. Matthew moved around the animal with practiced ease, speaking to her in a low, soothing voice, checking her progress. Delilah watched, fascinated by his gentleness with the frightened horse. "Talk to her," Matthew said. "Keep her calm while I try to help the foal." Delilah positioned herself at the mare's head, stroking her neck and murmuring soft words. The horse's eye rolled with pain and fear, but she seemed to take comfort from the human presence. Matthew worked carefully, and after what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, he managed to turn the foal. With a few more pushes from the mare, a tiny, wet creature slid into the world. "It's a colt," Matthew said, his voice filled with wonder. He quickly cleared the foal's nose and mouth, and the little one took his first shuddering breath. The mare nickered and turned to nuzzle her baby, and Delilah felt tears streaming down her face. "That was incredible," she whispered. Matthew looked at her across the stall, and something passed between them in that moment, a shared joy, a connection that went beyond words. He was smiling, really smiling, and she found herself smiling back. They stayed in the barn until the colt was standing on wobbly legs, nursing from his mother. Then they walked back to the house together, tired and covered in hay and birth fluids, but happy. "Thank you for helping," Matthew said. "You were good with her. Thank you for letting me be there." She paused at the base of the stairs. "Matthew, I want you to know that I'm grateful for this life you've given me. I know we married under strange circumstances, but I'm starting to think maybe it was meant to be this way." His eyes searched her face. "I'm glad you feel that way, because I can't imagine this house without you in it anymore." The words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Delilah felt her heart beat faster. This man had saved her, yes, but he was becoming so much more than that. He was becoming important to her in ways she hadn't expected. "Good night," she said softly. "Good night." But as she lay in bed that night, Delilah found herself wondering how long they could maintain this polite distance. She was attracted to Matthew, she couldn't deny it anymore. The way he moved, the sound of his laugh, the kindness in his eyes, the strength in his hands. She wanted to know what it would be like to be truly his wife, not just in name but in every way, The next morning, she woke to find a wildflower on her breakfast plate. Matthew was already outside working, but the message was clear. He was thinking of her too. Days turned into weeks. Summer deepened, the valley turning golden under the relentless California sun. Delilah's skin tanned, her hands grew stronger, and she felt herself changing in ways that had nothing to do with the physical. She was happier than she'd been in years, maybe happier than she'd ever been. The weight of her father's failures, the shame of that auction block began to fade, replaced by the simple contentment of good work and good company. Matthew courted her, she realized. That's what these past weeks had been, a courtship. He brought her flowers. He made her laugh. He asked her opinion on ranch decisions and actually listened to her answers. He bought her books from the general store when he went into town. He was patient and gentle and respectful, but she could see the wanting in his eyes when he looked at her, the same wanting she felt building in herself. One evening in late August, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Matthew reached over and took her hand. It was the first time he'd initiated physical contact beyond the necessary, and Delilah's breath caught at the warmth of his palm against hers. "Delilah," he said, his voice low and serious. "I know we agreed to take things slowly, but I need you to know that my feelings for you have grown beyond anything I expected. You're not just my wife in name anymore. You're the woman I think about every moment of the day. You're the person I want to talk to laugh with, to build a life with. I'm falling in love with you, and I needed you to know that." Her heart felt too big for her chest. "I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted. "I think I have been for weeks now." "You're nothing like I expected, Matthew Young. You're better." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned and sweet and made her feel cherished. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. "Really kiss you the way I've been wanting to for days?" "Yes," she whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she didn't want to. When his lips met hers, it was nothing like the chaste peck at their wedding. This kiss was deep and searching, full of all the longing they'd both been holding back. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb stroking her cheek, and she leaned into him, her fingers tangling in his hair. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "Come to my room tonight," he said. "Be my wife in every way." "Yes," she said again, because it was the only answer she wanted to give. That night, Delilah stood in front of the mirror in her room, wearing only her nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. She was nervous. She'd never been with a man before, but more than nervous, she was eager. She wanted this, wanted him. She knocked softly on Matthew's door, and he opened it immediately, as if he'd been waiting right there. He'd removed his shirt, and she could see the lean muscles of his chest and arms, the scars from years of hard living. He was beautiful in a rough, masculine way that made her mouth go dry. "Are you sure?" he asked, even now giving her an out. "I'm sure." He drew her into the room, into his arms, and kissed her with all the passion he'd been holding back. His hands roamed her body, learning her curves through the thin fabric of her nightgown, and she pressed closer, wanting to feel all of him against her. He lifted her and carried her to the bed, laying her down gently, treating her like something precious. What followed was tender and passionate, awkward and perfect all at once. Matthew was patient with her inexperience, showing her with his hands and his mouth all the ways a man could pleasure a woman. When he finally joined their bodies, there was a moment of pain, but he held her through it, whispering words of love and encouragement. Then there was only pleasure, building and building until they both found their release, clinging to each other as if they could merge into one person. Afterward, they lay tangled together, sweaty and satisfied, and Delilah felt completely at peace for the first time since her mother died. Matthew traced patterns on her bare shoulder, pressing kisses to her temple. "I love you," he said. "I know it's fast, but I love you, Delilah." "I love you too." She turned to face him, seeing her own joy reflected in his eyes. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for loving me. You saved me too," he said. "I didn't even realize how lonely I was until you were here." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and from that night on, Delilah never slept in the guest room again. The months that followed were the happiest of Delilah's life. She and Matthew fell deeper in love with each passing day, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal passion. The physical intimacy between them was matched by emotional intimacy. They talked about everything, shared their fears and hopes and dreams. They worked side by side on the ranch, Delilah proving herself capable with horses and cattle both. Jack and Rose became true friends, and the four of them spent many evenings together, playing cards and sharing meals. In October, Delilah realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week to be sure, then told Matthew the news while they were grooming horses together in the barn. "I'm with child," she said simply. The brush fell from Matthew's hand. He stared at her, his face cycling through shock, wonder, and pure joy. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be. I'm about 6 weeks along, I think." He let out a whoop that startled the horses and swept her into his arms, spinning her around. "We're having a baby. Delilah, we're going to be parents," she laughed, holding tight to his shoulders. "I was hoping you'd be happy." "Happy? I'm over the moon." He set her down carefully, suddenly anxious. "Should you be doing this kind of work? Should you be resting? What do you need?" "I need you to stop fussing," she said, amused. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while doing all sorts of work. I'm strong and healthy, but I will need to see a doctor at some point." Matthew insisted on taking her into town the very next day to see the doctor, who confirmed her pregnancy and pronounced her in excellent health. As they left the doctor's office, they ran into someone Delilah had hoped never to see again. Her father was standing on the street corner, looking even more worn and haggard than he had 4 months ago. When he saw her, his face crumpled with emotion. "Delilah," he said hoarsely, "I heard you were married to a rancher. I'm glad. I'm so glad you're all right." She felt Matthew tense beside her, ready to intervene if needed. But looking at her father, Delilah felt more pity than anger. He destroyed his own life along with nearly destroying hers, and he'd have to live with that knowledge for the rest of his days. "I'm more than all right," she said quietly. "I'm happy. I have a husband who loves me, a home, and a baby on the way." Her father's eyes filled with tears. "A baby. Delilah, that's wonderful. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope someday you might find it in your heart. I forgive you," she interrupted. She realized as she said it that it was true. The anger and hurt had faded, leaving only a sort of sad acceptance. "What you did was terrible, and I won't forget it, but I forgive you. I'm too happy now to carry that bitterness around." "Thank you," her father whispered. "That's more than I deserve." Matthew spoke for the first time. "There's a hotel on the edge of town that needs a clerk. The owner is a friend of mine. If you're serious about getting your life together, I can put in a word for you. But if you ever hurt Delilah again in any way, you'll answer to me." Her father nodded quickly. "I'm done with gambling, I swear it. I haven't touched cards in 2 months. I've been working odd jobs, trying to save up enough to leave town, start over somewhere where people don't know what I did." "You don't have to leave," Delilah found herself saying. "If you truly want to change, you can do it here. But I can't have you in my life the way you were before. If you want to know your grandchild, you'll have to prove you're a different man." "I will. I swear I will." Matthew kept his word and got her father the job at the hotel. Over the following months, Delilah received occasional reports that he was doing well, staying sober, keeping out of trouble. She didn't seek him out, but she didn't turn him away when he sent a carefully worded note congratulating her on the pregnancy and expressing his hope that someday he might meet his grandchild. Winter came to the valley, bringing cooler temperatures and rain that turned everything green. Delilah's belly grew round with their child, and Matthew was impossibly attentive, insisting she rest more, making sure she ate well, rubbing her sore feet in the evenings. They spent long nights by the fire, talking about names and futures, dreaming about the family they were creating. "I want our children to know they're loved," Matthew said one night, his hand resting on her swollen stomach. "I want them to grow up safe and happy with both parents who would do anything for them." "They will," Delilah promised. "We'll make sure of it." In March of 1879, Delilah went into labor. Rose came to help, having delivered several babies in her time, and Matthew refused to leave Delilah's side despite Rose's assertion that this was women's work. He held Delilah's hand through every contraction, wiped her face with a cool cloth, encouraged her when she was sure she couldn't go on. After 12 hours of hard labor, their son was born just as the sun was rising. He came into the world screaming, red-faced and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. "A boy," Matthew said, his voice choked with emotion. "Delilah, we have a son." She was exhausted but elated, holding their baby against her chest and marveling at his tiny fingers, his perfect little face. "He's beautiful. What should we name him?" They discussed names for months but never settled on one. Matthew looked at his son, then at his wife, and said, "Samuel." "After my father. Samuel Young." "Samuel," Delilah repeated, testing it out. "Sam, I love it." Rose cleaned up the baby and helped Delilah into a fresh nightgown, then discreetly left the new family alone. Matthew climbed into bed beside Delilah, the three of them forming a small, perfect unit. "I can't believe he's ours," Matthew whispered, running a gentle finger down Sam's cheek. "I can't believe I get to have this, a family, a real family." "We made him," Delilah said, filled with wonder. "You and I made this person." They spent the rest of the day just being with their son, learning his sounds and expressions, taking turns holding him, marveling at the miracle of his existence. Jack came by in the evening with a bottle of whiskey to wet the baby's head, and later, after everyone had left, Delilah nursed Sam for the first time, feeling the strange, powerful bond of motherhood settle over her. "You're amazing," Matthew told her, watching them. "I fall more in love with you every single day." "I love you too," she said. "Thank you for this life, Matthew. Thank you for everything." The first year of Sam's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and perfect moments. He was a good baby, healthy and happy, and both Matthew and Delilah doted on him shamelessly. The ranch prospered, with the horse breeding program becoming well known throughout California. Matthew hired more hands and they expanded the herd. On their first wedding anniversary, Matthew took Delilah into town for dinner at the nicest restaurant San Pedro had to offer, leaving Sam with Rose and Jack for the evening. It felt strange to be without their son, but also freeing, a reminder that they were still husband and wife, not just parents. "1 year ago, I tore up those papers and asked you to marry me," Matthew said over dessert. "It was the best decision I've ever made." "I was so scared that day," Delilah admitted. "But you gave me hope when I had none. You gave me love when I didn't think I deserved it. This year has been the best of my life. Here's to many more." He raised his glass and they toasted to the future. When they returned to the ranch that night, they found Rose had put Sam to bed and left them a note saying to enjoy the evening. Matthew pulled Delilah into his arms on their porch, and they danced to music only they could hear, swaying under the stars. "I want more children," Matthew murmured against her hair. "Lots of them, if you're willing. I want this house full of life and laughter." "So do I," Delilah said. "I want to give Sam brothers and sisters. I want the family we both never really had." They went upstairs to their bedroom and made love with the passion of people who knew each other's bodies intimately, but were still discovering new ways to bring each other pleasure. Delilah conceived again that night, though they wouldn't know it for certain for another few weeks. Their second child, a daughter they named Clara after Matthew's sister, was born in the spring of 1880. She had Delilah's dark hair and Matthew's blue eyes, and from the moment she entered the world, she had her father wrapped completely around her tiny finger. Matthew was impossibly gentle with her, as if she might break, and Delilah would often find him in the nursery at night, just watching their daughter sleep. "I wish my Clara could have met her namesake," he said one night. "I wish she could have known the happiness that comes from being loved the right way." "She knows," Delilah said softly. "Wherever she is, she knows you honored her memory and that you're living the life she would have wanted for you." 2 years later came twin boys, Michael and James, who were absolute hellions from the moment they could crawl. They kept Delilah and Matthew on their toes, always getting into mischief, but filling the house with so much joy and chaos that neither parent would have changed a thing. With 4 children under the age of 5, life was hectic. Matthew hired a woman from town to help Delilah with the household work, insisting that she shouldn't have to do everything herself. They expanded the house, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The ranch continued to thrive, becoming one of the most successful operations in the valley. Through it all, Delilah and Matthew's love only deepened. They still made time for each other, stealing moments alone when they could, keeping the passion and romance alive even amidst the chaos of raising children. They were partners in every sense of the word, making decisions together, supporting each other through challenges, celebrating victories as a team. 5 years after Sam's birth, Delilah's father came to visit. He'd stayed sober and working at the hotel, and had slowly rebuilt his reputation in San Pedro. He asked tentatively if he might meet his grandchildren, and after discussing it with Matthew, Delilah agreed. The visit was awkward at first. Sam, now 6, regarded his grandfather with suspicion, sensing his mother's uncertainty. But her father had brought small toys for each child, and he was patient and kind, telling stories and making the kids laugh. By the end of the afternoon, even Sam had warmed to him. "You have a beautiful family," her father said as he prepared to leave. "You've built something wonderful here, Delilah. Your mother would be so proud of you." "Thank you, Papa." She found she could call him that again without bitterness. "You can visit again if you'd like." "I'd like that very much." He became a periodic presence in their lives, a grandfather who'd learned his lessons the hard way but was determined to be better. It wasn't the relationship Delilah had once dreamed of having with her father, but it was something, and she was at peace with it. The years rolled on. Sam grew tall and strong, with his father's way with horses and his mother's love of learning. Clara became a fierce, independent girl who could outride most of the ranch hands by the time she was 10. The twins were inseparable, always together, always plotting some new adventure. In 1886, when Sam was 7, Clara 5, and the twins 3, Delilah gave birth to their 5th and final child, another daughter they named Margaret. By this time, Matthew and Delilah were both 32 years old, seasoned parents who took the new baby in stride. "Our family is complete," Matthew said, holding baby Margaret while their other children crowded around to see their new sister. "This is everything I ever wanted." Delilah looked at her husband, at their 5 beautiful children, at the home they'd built together from nothing but circumstance and hope. "It's more than I ever dreamed of," she said. "You saved my life that day in San Pedro, Matthew. But more than that, you gave me a reason to live." "You saved me too," he said, as he always did. "We saved each other." The years continued to pass in a blur of birthdays and Christmases, school lessons and ranch work, skinned knees and childhood illnesses. Matthew and Delilah grew older together, their love maturing from passionate newness into something deeper and more enduring. They knew each other completely, every scar, every secret, every fear and hope. Jack and Rose had children of their own, and the two families became intertwined, the kids growing up together like cousins. The ranch expanded until it was one of the largest and most successful in California. Matthew's horse breeding program gained national recognition, with buyers coming from as far as New York to purchase his trained horses. Through it all, Delilah never forgot where she'd come from: the auction block, the shame, the desperation. She used her position to help other women in difficult situations, quietly providing jobs on the ranch or assistance when needed. She became known in San Pedro as someone who would help, no questions asked, and many young women found refuge and second chances because of her. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Matthew took Delilah back to San Pedro, to the very spot where they'd been married. It was sunset, the sky painted in shades of gold and rose, and they stood hand in hand where they'd spoken their vows all those years ago. "I would do it all again," Matthew said. "Every moment, every decision, everything that led me to you. So would I." Delilah turned to face him, seeing the silver threading through his dark hair, the lines at the corners of his eyes from years of squinting into the sun and smiling. He was even more handsome now than he'd been at 26, weathered and strong and completely hers. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Matthew Young." "No," he said, pulling her close. "We're the best thing that ever happened to each other." He kissed her there in the fading light, and Delilah thought back to that terrified girl on the auction block, certain her life was over. That girl could never have imagined this future, this love, this family, this joy. Sometimes the worst moments led to the best outcomes. Sometimes being saved by a stranger turned into being loved by a husband. Sometimes tearing up papers that bound someone into servitude set both people free. They returned to the ranch as the stars came out, to the house filled with their children's laughter, to the life they'd built together from nothing but hope and determination and love. Sam was 14 now, already a skilled horseman, preparing to take on more responsibility around the ranch. Clara at 12 was becoming a young woman, fierce and independent. The twins, now 10, were still troublemakers but showed promise of becoming fine men. And little Margaret at 7 was the baby of the family, adored and spoiled by everyone. As Delilah stood on the porch that night, watching Matthew show Sam how to properly mend a saddle by lamplight, listening to Clara practice her piano inside the house while the twins played with Margaret on the living room floor, she felt her heart swell with gratitude. This was everything. This was more than everything. Matthew looked up and caught her watching them. He smiled, that special smile that was only for her, and mouthed the words, "I love you." She mouthed it back, this man who'd saved her, married her, loved her, given her this beautiful life. Then she went inside to join her family, to live one more perfect evening in a life full of them, knowing that the best was still to come. The seasons turned. Sam grew into a man, taking over more of the ranch operations as Matthew began to slow down in his 50s. He fell in love with a sweet girl from town, and Matthew and Delilah celebrated their eldest son's wedding with joy and perhaps a few tears. Clara proved herself an excellent businesswoman, helping to expand the ranch's breeding program into new markets. The twins went off to college in San Francisco, the first in the family to pursue higher education, thanks to their parents' success and determination to give their children opportunities. Margaret, the baby, stayed closest to home, inheriting her mother's way with people and her father's way with horses. She talked often of becoming a teacher, of helping children the way her parents had helped so many over the years. Matthew and Delilah became grandparents when Sam and his wife welcomed a baby girl. Holding his first grandchild, Matthew looked at Delilah with tears in his eyes. "We did it," he said. "We broke the cycle. Our children know what real love looks like, and they'll pass that on to their children." "We did it together," Delilah corrected, as she always did. They grew old together on the ranch they'd built, watching their children and grandchildren flourish, watching the land they'd tended prosper and thrive. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, still held hands like young lovers, still found reasons to laugh every single day. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a huge celebration. The ranch was full of family and friends, people whose lives Matthew and Delilah had touched over the decades. There were toasts and laughter, stories told and retold, children running everywhere. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Matthew and Delilah sat alone on their porch, watching the stars wheel overhead in the vast California sky. "Do you ever think about that day?" Matthew asked. "The auction?" "Sometimes," Delilah admitted. "But mostly I think about what came after. I think about the life we built from that terrible moment. I think about how the worst day of my life led to the best life I could have imagined." Matthew squeezed her hand. "I was so angry that day. When I heard what was happening, something in me just snapped. I couldn't stand by and let them treat you like property. I didn't know then that saving you would save me too." "We saved each other," Delilah said, echoing the words they'd said so many times over the years. "And we'll keep saving each other, every day for the rest of our lives." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The house behind them was full of love and life, the land around them was fertile and productive, and their children were happy and secure. They had everything they'd ever dreamed of and more. "I love you," Matthew said, as he had every day for 30 years. "I love you too," Delilah replied, as she always would. The stars shone down on them on the ranch, on the valley spread out below in shades of silver and shadow. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, as every tomorrow did. But tonight was perfect. This moment was perfect, and they were together. That was all that mattered. Years later, when both Matthew and Delilah had passed into memory, their great-grandchildren would tell the story of how they met. The tale would grow in the telling, becoming legend the cowboy who saved the girl from the auction block, tore up the papers that bound her, and proposed right there in front of everyone. Some details would change, but the heart of the story would remain true. A love born from desperation and kindness, nurtured through challenges and joy, lasting beyond a lifetime. The ranch still stands, run by their descendants who carry on the values Matthew and Delilah instilled: hard work, compassion, the belief that everyone deserves a second chance. The house is still full of love and laughter, just as they always wanted. And on clear nights, when the stars are bright, you can almost see two figures sitting on the porch, hand in hand, watching over the legacy they created together. Their love story didn't begin with a fairy tale meeting or a conventional courtship. It began with one man's decision to do the right thing, with tearing up papers of servitude and offering freedom instead. It began with a woman brave enough to take a chance on a stranger, to trust in the possibility of something better. And it grew into something magnificent: a partnership, a family, a life built on mutual respect and abiding love. That's the story of Matthew Young and Delilah Sutherland, who became Delilah Young on a hot July day in San Pedro, California in 1878. It's a story of redemption and hope, of love conquering circumstance, of two broken people making each other whole. It's a reminder that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures, and that real love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about showing up every day, choosing each other over and over again, and building something lasting together. Their story ended, as all stories do, but the love they created lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch that still bears their name, in the lives they touched, and the second chances they gave to others. And perhaps that's the truest measure of a life well lived, not in the years counted but in the love shared, not in possessions accumulated but in hearts touched, not in avoiding hardship but in facing it together and emerging stronger on the other side. Matthew Young saved Delilah Sutherland on that auction block, but she saved him too, in all the ways that mattered. They saved each other every day for the rest of their lives, and in doing so, created something beautiful and enduring. They proved that love can bloom in the harshest circumstances, that family can be chosen as well as born, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust in the possibility of happiness, even when everything seems hopeless. That's their legacy, written in the land they loved, carried on by the family they created, remembered in the hearts of everyone who knew them. And though they've been gone for generations now, their love story endures, a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of commitment, and the transformative nature of true love. The end came peacefully for both of them, Matthew at 78 and Delilah at 72, both surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, both secure in the knowledge that they'd lived fully and loved completely. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a pair of oak trees they'd planted together on their 10th anniversary. Their headstone bore simple words, "Together in life, together in eternity." And so the story closes, as all good stories must, with love victorious and lives well lived, with family thriving and legacy secured. Matthew and Delilah Young's journey from that desperate auction block to a lifetime of love and happiness stands as proof that sometimes, even in the darkest moments, hope can find a way. Sometimes a stranger can become a savior. And sometimes, tearing up papers and offering freedom can be the beginning of the greatest love story ever told.